The night was silent, but when the headlights appeared, I knew what was coming. Another crash, another explosion of wood and metal flying into the dark. They thought it was funny, running over my mailbox again and again, but what they didn't know is that I was waiting for them this time, and when they finally hit it, they didn't just break their car, they uncovered something they never saw coming. Welcome back to HOA Chaos, where the suburbs look perfect on the outside, but inside, every street hides a storm. My name is Marcus. I'm a rancher living on the edge of this quiet HOA neighborhood in Texas. I take care of my land, my animals, and I try to mind my own business. But the board, and their so-called cops, had other plans for me. This is the story of how a simple mailbox turned into a war. The story began on a quiet Texas evening, the kind of evening where the crickets sing louder than the cars, where the wind moves slow across the fields, and the world feels calm, safe. But I knew better, because in my neighborhood, calm never lasted long. I walked to the end of my gravel driveway, boots pressing into the dirt, and there it was again, my poor mailbox leaning to the side, half crushed. The wooden post splintered, the black box twisted open like a broken jaw, mail scattered across the ditch. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I bent down, picked up a letter, and I could still smell the heat of tires on it. They did it again. The HOA cops, their private little patrol car, pretending to be lawmen when really they were just men in uniforms with too much time and too little respect. I had seen them pass here 100 times, sometimes speeding like it was a racetrack, sometimes slowing down, giving me that look, that grin that told me they were above me, that I was just another man they could push around. But what they loved most was smas. Hing my mailbox. The first time it happened, I thought maybe it was a mistake. The second time, I knew it wasn't. By the third time, I realized this was a game for them, and for me. It was a war I never asked for. You see, the HOA here isn't like most. It isn't just old folks worrying about grass height or fence color. No, this one runs like a little kingdom. The board president acts like a queen. Her officers act like knights, and everyone else is supposed to bow down and follow the rules. Rules like, your lawn must be trimmed at exactly 3 inches. Rules like, you cannot hang your laundry outside. Rules like, mailboxes must all be exactly the same, in the exact same spot. That's the one that killed me, because my mailbox was in the exact spot the rules required. But every time they smashed it, the board fined me for not fixing it fast enough. Imagine that. Punished for their own crime. I went to the board once. I remember it clear. I walked into the room where they sat around their table, pictures of the neighborhood on the wall, like they owned every inch of it, and I told them, your security car hit my mailbox again. Do you know what they said? They laughed. One of them actually laughed out loud. Then the president said, maybe you should move your mailbox back a little. Back a little? The same president who fined my neighbor $200 for moving hers 1 inch off regulation height? The same president who sent out letters saying, uniformity is the foundation of community. I wanted to explode, but I kept my voice calm. I said, the rules say it has to be there, and it is there, so why don't you fine your cops instead? And that's when I saw her eyes, cold, sharp, not smiling like her mouth, and I knew I had made myself a target. From that day on, it got worse. Every week, sometimes twice a week, the car would clip my mailbox, sometimes just bending it, sometimes as destroying it completely, and every time. I got another fine in the mail, $50, $100, $200. The board said, we don't know who is hitting it, but it's your responsibility to fix it. And if I didn't pay, they said they'd put a lien on my property. Now let me tell you something. This land has been in my family for generations. My grandfather worked this soil with his bare hands. My father built the house with his own tools, and now me. I was being threatened with losing it all. Over a mailbox. It made me angry. But it also made me laugh, because the stupidity of it all was almost funny. Almost, I kept fixing the mailbox, trip after trip to the hardware store. Nails, wood, paint, more nails. Every time I put it back together, And every time they knocked it down again, my neighbors started whispering about it. They'd see me out there hammering in the heat. They'd see the patrol car pass. And then the smash. And then me cursing under my breath as I picked up broken pieces. Some of them shook their heads in pity. Others? Well, some of them laughed too. But me, I was done being the neighborhood's joke, done being the board's punching bag, done paying for what wasn't my fault. So one evening, I stood there staring at that ruined mailbox. The sun was setting behind me, casting long shadows across the road, and I thought, if this is the game they want, then I'll play it. But not their way, my way. I went to work the next morning, not at my ranch, but at the supply yard. I bought cement, steel, heavy tools that weighed down my truck bed, and I brought it all home for 2 days straight. I worked in silence, digging deep into the dirt, pouring concrete so thick it would take a hurricane to shake it, sliding a steel post inside, hidden under the wood, and then placing the same regulation-size mailbox on top, black paint, silver flag. Exactly what the HOA demanded. On the outside, it looked ordinary, but inside, it was strong enough to stop a truck. I stepped back, wiped the sweat off my brow, and smiled, because for the first time, I felt ready. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, waiting. And sure enough, headlights appeared down the road. The patrol car slowed near my driveway, then sped up. I held my breath. And then, the sound. Crash. Metal bending. Glass shattering. The scream of tires losing control. I ran outside, and there it was. Their car. Smoking. Front end crushed like an accordion, and my mailbox. Still standing tall, the driver crawled out, holding his head. Stumbling around, he looked at me like I was the criminal, like I had set a trap. But all I did was follow the rules, and in that moment, I realized the war had just begun. The car sat there, front smashed like a tin can, steam poured out from the hood. Headlights flickered weak and broken, and me, I just stood with my arms crossed, watching. The driver cursed under his breath, kicked the door open, and staggered into the dirt. It was one of their cops. The same man I'd seen smiling as he passed my house week after week. Only now, he wasn't smiling. He looked at my mailbox, then at me, and I'll never forget the words he muttered. "You messed with the wrong one, kid." Kid? He called me kid. I was a grown man, a rancher with more years behind me than he'd ever worked a real job. But that's the way these HOA men saw us, as children who needed discipline, and they were the fathers who gave it. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the mailbox, standing tall, unbroken, and I let the silence speak louder than any words could. The next morning, the letters arrived, 3 of them, stacked neatly in my box that was now stronger than steel. One from the HOA president, one from the security division, and one from their lawyer. The first was a fine, damage to community property caused by non-compliant structure. They claimed my mailbox was dangerous, even though it matched every rule in their little handbook. The second was a warning. It said my behavior was hostile, that I was creating unsafe conditions for neighborhood patrol. And the third, the lawyer's letter, was the sharpest knife. It threatened a lawsuit, said I had acted with malicious intent, that my mailbox was a hazard, and that if I didn't remove it, they would take me to court. I laughed when I read it, out loud, standing in my kitchen with the papers in my hand, because the irony was too rich. For months, they destroyed my mailbox. For months, they fined me. For months, they mocked me. And now that I had one that survived their destruction, I was the criminal. But laughter only lasted so long, because soon, the whispers began. Neighbors walking their dogs stopped talking when I passed. Mothers with strollers pulled their kids a little closer, and the older men, the ones who sat outside in lawn chairs, shook their heads and said, "Troublemaker." It felt strange, because I wasn't the one smashing cars into mailboxes. I wasn't the one breaking rules. I was just a man trying to protect what was mine. But in HOA land, perception is power, and the board controlled perception like a puppeteer controls strings. One evening, as I fixed the gate on my ranch, my neighbor Jim walked over. He was a good man once, worked at the feed store, laughed easy, but tonight, his face was hard. He said, "Marcus, you're making things worse for all of us." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" He lowered his voice. "The board raised fees this month, said it's for increased patrol costs. But we all know why." He looked straight at me. "It's because of you." I wanted to argue, to tell him the truth. But what was the point? People believed what they wanted, and right now, they wanted to believe I was the villain. That night, I sat on my porch, staring out at the mailbox. The moonlight hit the steel core hidden beneath the wood, and I thought about my father, how he used to say, "A man's land is his name, and his name is all he leaves behind." I wasn't about to let some petty board take that away from me, so I made a choice. I wouldn't just end my mailbox. I would fight them on their own ground. The next board meeting came fast. The room was packed, folding chairs filled, people standing in the back. I walked in wearing my boots, denim shirt and hat, and when the president saw me, her smile froze. She started with the usual talk, budgets, community events, paint colors, but then she got to new business, and that's when she said my name. "Mr. Marcus has installed a non-compliant mailbox that endangers our patrol officers." The crowd turned their eyes on me, whispers spreading like wildfire. I stood up slow, cleared my throat, and said, "With all due respect, my mailbox is regulation height, regulation color, regulation everything, and the only thing it endangers is cars that shouldn't be hitting it in the first place." The room gasped. The president's face tightened. She leaned forward and said, "That's not the point. The point is your defiance." Defiance, that's what they called it. Not self-defense, not compliance. Defiance. I looked around at the faces staring back at me, some angry, some curious, some just tired of drama, and I said, "If following your rules exactly is defiance, then maybe the problem isn't me." The silence that followed felt like a storm before thunder, and then thunder came. The board voted, 5 hands raised, 1 against. Motion passed. They ordered me to remove my mailbox within 7 days, or else face daily fines and legal action. I walked out of that meeting with my jaw tight because I knew something they didn't know. I wasn't moving that mailbox. Not for them, not for anyone. But the war was only beginning. The next week, patrol cars didn't just drive past, they parked near my driveway. Engines idling. Headlights pointing at my house, sometimes 2 cars, sometimes 3. They weren't hiding anymore. It was intimidation. And then the letters grew worse. Not just fines, not just warnings, but letters. From neighbors too, slipped under my door, taped to my fence, left in my mailbox. Notes calling me selfish, reckless, dangerous. Notes saying I was bringing shame to the community. At night, I'd hear voices outside. Whispers I couldn't quite catch. Footsteps on the gravel, and once, I swear I saw someone with a flashlight scanning my yard. I slept less and less. The board thought they could break me with papers and threats. But papers can be burned. And threats only work on men who fear losing something. Me. I already lost my peace the first time they crushed my mailbox. So what else could they take? The nights grew longer after that meeting, not because the sun stayed down, but because I couldn't close my eyes. Every sound in the dark made me sit up straight. Every car that passed, every crunch of gravel, every whisper of wind against the fence. It all sounded like war drums to me. One night, I heard voices outside again, low, hushed. 2 men. I peeked through the blinds. 2 figures in uniform stood by the patrol car parked near my driveway. One of them pointed toward my mailbox. The other laughed. I gripped my shotgun tight, not because I planned to use it, but because holding it reminded me I wasn't powerless. The next morning, I found something strange, a note tucked under the flag of my mailbox. It wasn't from the board. It wasn't official. It was handwritten, messy, and it said, "Take it down, or next time it won't just be the car." I stared at those words for a long time, and then I folded the paper, slipped it into my pocket, and smiled. Because the note told me one thing. I was winning. If they had to threaten me in the dark, it meant they couldn't beat me in the light. But that didn't mean the battle was easy. The fines kept piling up. Every week a new letter. Every letter a new number. 500, 600, until one morning, I opened the envelope and my chest tightened. They had filed for a lien. They were trying to take my home. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with rage. How could they twist the law to his way? How could a group of neighbors sitting in a clubhouse hold the power to take away land that had been in my family for generations? I thought about giving in. Just for a second, I thought about tearing down the mailbox, paying the fines, and ending the nightmare. But then I stepped outside, and the sun hit that steel post, solid, unbroken, shining like a promise. And I knew I couldn't fold, because if I folded now, they wouldn't just own my mailbox, they'd own me. So I did what any stubborn rancher would do. I went to the courthouse. The clerk raised her eyebrows when she saw the papers. Another HOA case, she said. She told me the judge had seen plenty, but I could tell from the way she looked at me. She didn't think I'd win. That made me want to fight harder. When the day came, I walked into that courtroom with my boots clicking against the floor. The board sat on the other side, dressed like it was Sunday morning at church. Their lawyer polished his glasses as if he already won. The judge asked for my side first, so I told it plain, how the patrol cars hit my mailbox over and over, how I replaced it every time, how the board fined me for their destruction, and how I finally built one that could survive. I pulled out photos, receipts, even the letters they sent, and when I was done, I looked the judge in the eye and said, all I did was follow the rules. Silence filled the room. The board whispered among themselves. Their lawyer stood up next. He waved papers, spoke of dangerous structures and reckless endangerment. He painted me as a violent man with a hidden trap waiting to kill. But the truth was stronger than his words. The judge leaned back, tapped her pen, and finally said, from where I stand, this looks like compliance, not defiance. I kept my shotgun close by the bed, and every morning I stepped outside, expecting to see that mailbox gone, but it stood strong, every side, angle time. And maybe that's what scared them most, because no matter what they threw at me, I refused to bend. The board thought they could scare me into compliance, but all they did was make me strong. The board's faces dropped. Their lawyer stammered, tried to argue, but the judge raised her hand. She said she would review the case further, but for now, no lien would be placed. That was only a small victory, but in war, even small victories keep you alive. When I walked out of that courthouse, the board glared at me like I had spit on their shoes, and I knew they weren't done. They couldn't break me with cars. They couldn't break me with fines. They couldn't break me with court, so they turned to something else. My neighbors. It started with whispers, then meetings I wasn't invited to, then cold stares when I walked into the store. Children who used to wave now looked away. It was like a shadow followed me everywhere. One day, my neighbor across the street put up a sign. It said, "Safety First," in big red letters. A day later, another sign appeared on the next lawn, then another, and another. By the end of the week, half the street had signs warning about dangerous neighbors. Dangerous neighbors, meaning me. I walked outside, looked at all the signs, and for a moment, I felt alone in a crowd. But then, something happened I didn't expect. An old man, Mr. Carter, who lived 2 blocks down, walked up my driveway. He leaned on his cane, looked at my mailbox, then looked at me, and he said, "Don't give up, son. They tried the same on me once, and I wish I had fought back like you." His words lit a fire inside me, because it meant I wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, others felt the same but were too afraid to speak. So I kept standing. I kept my mailbox strong. I paid what I had to, fought what I could, and waited for the next move. And oh, the next move came. Late one night, when the moon was high and the crickets were loud, I heard another crash. But this time, it wasn't my mailbox. It was glass. The window of my truck, shattered in the driveway. I ran outside, shotgun in hand. But whoever did it was gone. Only a brick remained on the seat, wrapped in paper. On the paper were 4 words scrawled in ink. "Next time, your house." I stood there, heart pounding. Because this wasn't just about rules anymore. It wasn't about mailboxes. It wasn't about lawns or fines. It was personal, and it was war. The brick in my truck seat haunted me for days. Every time I walked past the driveway, I saw the glass glinting in the dirt. Every time I closed my eyes at night, I saw those words again. Next time, your house. It was one thing to smash a mailbox, one thing to fine me. But this was a promise, and I didn't know when it would be kept. I started leaving the porch light on all night. I sat with the shotgun across my lap until the crickets faded into dawn. My ranch didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a battlefield. And the strange thing was, I wasn't just fighting the HOA board. I was fighting shadows I couldn't see. Who threw that brick? Was it one of the patrol officers? Was it one of my neighbors who hated the sight of my mailbox? Or was it the board itself, sending a message without putting their names on it? The paranoia grew when a car slowed near my driveway. My stomach tightened when a dog barked in the distance. I thought it was warning me. Even the wind in the trees felt like whispers plotting against me. One night, I finally cracked. I walked out into the street and shouted, "Come on then! If you're gonna do it now." My voice echoed down the cul-de-sac. Lights turned on in windows, but no one came out. Instead, the next morning, another letter arrived. This one wasn't a fine. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The board had called a special community meeting. The subject line read, "Neighborhood Safety Concerns." And I already knew what the meeting was about. I thought about not going. But then I thought, why should I hide? So I put on my boots, my hat, and it walked straight into that clubhouse. The room was packed tighter than before, every chair filled. Neighbors lined along the walls. When I stepped inside, the noise dropped. All eyes turned to me. Some full of anger, some full of fear, some just curious. The president cleared her throat. She wore her usual smile, but her eyes were sharp as glass. She said, "We are here tonight because one resident has created a hostile environment for our community." Gasps, whispers, eyes locked on me. She went on. "His reckless behavior has endangered our officers. His defiance has caused rising costs, and his actions have divided this neighborhood." I stood there listening, hands clenched at my sides, and when she finally paused, I spoke. "You call it reckless. I call it survival. You call it defiance. I call it compliance. And you call it division. But who divided us first?" The room grew tense. Someone shouted from the back, "You're dangerous!" Another yelled, "Take it down already!" But then, another voice spoke up. It was old Mr. Carter. He stood with his cane and said, "He's the only one here who had the guts to stand against you." The board tried to silence him, tried to move on, but the crack had already shown. Not everyone was against me. Even if most were too scared to speak, the president's smile faded and she slammed her gavel down. "This meeting is adjourned." But as I walked out, I knew it wasn't over, because the board had something left. They always had something left. 2 nights later, I found out what it was. I woke to the sound of sirens, red and blue lights flashing through my window. I rushed outside, heart pounding, shotgun in hand, and there, in my front yard, stood 2 sheriff's deputies. They weren't HOA cops this time. They were real law, and they held papers in their hands. "Marcus," one of them said, "we have a complaint filed against you." I frowned. Complaint for what? The deputy read the paper. Disturbing the peace, intimidation, threat to community safety. My jaw dropped. The HOA had gone beyond fines, beyond meetings. They had gone to the county itself, twisting their lies into legal filings. The deputies weren't cruel, they weren't unkind, but they warned me. If this escalates further, you could face charges. When they left, I stood in the yard staring at the flashing taillights, the weight of it all pressing down on me, and for the first time, I wondered if they might actually win. But then I looked at my mailbox, still standing strong, and I felt the fire again. I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about power. It was about showing every neighbor that the board could crush anyone who resisted. If I gave up, I'd prove them right. If I stood tall, maybe others would too. So I made a decision. If they wanted war, I'd give them war. But not with guns, not with fists, with the one weapon they couldn't fight. Their own rules. I started reading the bylaws, page after page of absurd regulations. Grass height, mailbox paint, garage door color, even the number of Christmas lights allowed per house. And as I read, I saw something the board never expected. Loopholes, contradictions, rules. They themselves had broken. I began taking notes. Photos of the president's yard, where her grass stood half an inch too high. Pictures of her ally's garage, stuffed with non-approved storage. Records of fines issued without proper notice. Bit by bit, I built a case, and while I worked in silence, the board kept pushing. Another patrol car slowed near my driveway. Another note appeared on my fence. Last chance. Another neighbor shouted at me as I walked by, but I didn't flinch, because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. I knew something big was coming, and when it did, I would be ready. I started small. A photo here, a receipt there, a page of their handbook with the lines they like to skip. I worked like a man with no time to waste, because when people push you to the edge, you learn to move fast and quiet. I walked the neighborhood, it every day, not to spy, but to see. I took pictures of the president's fence that leaned into the street, a clear violation of her own rulebook. I wrote down dates when the patrol car parked on the wrong side of the road and left a dent in a street sign. I found letters the board sent without the proper signatures, and I saved copies of their fines that had no legal backing. It was boring work, paper and patience, but it built a bridge to the truth. I also started talking to people, quietly, one by one. Not with anger, but with questions. I asked how long they had to pay fees, how notices arrived, who decided what colors were allowed. Some shut the door, some said nothing, but some listened. Mr. Carter gave me old files from his time on the block. He said the board used tricks then too, and he had the notes to prove it. A woman named Lisa, who worked nights at the diner, whispered that the patrol drivers complained about being pushed into doing favors for the board. A mail carrier told me stories about how packages went missing near the clubhouse, and how someone always seemed to be standing watch when certain cars came through. Little pieces came together like a puzzle, and each piece felt like a small win. I learned how the HOA actually worked, the paper trail behind their power. They liked to hide behind rules that looked fair on paper, but were used as weapons in practice. They loved the sound of authority more than the idea of justice, so I started to use that authority against them, in the only way that would hurt them the most, where they lived, their reputation. I filed formal complaints where they needed the papers to be clean and true. I sent requests for official minutes from meetings they hurriedly wrote down later. I asked for proof of insurance for their security division, and for the certifications they boasted about in the newsletter. Each request arrived like a small stone on the roof of their proud house. Some stones they shrugged off, some stones cracked a tile. When the board answered, they did so with anger and hatch. They called me reckless again. They called me a liar. They labeled my questions as harassment, but I had backups, copies of every email, receipts for every payment I made, timestamps on photos from my phone that showed dates exactly when the patrol car passed. And then I did something the board never expected. I printed a simple flyer, not hateful, not loud, just plain facts, a timeline of events, dates and times, photos of the smashed mailboxes, the patrol car wrecked in my yard, copies of their fines and my receipts, quotes from the president saying one thing while her yard showed another. I dropped a flyer at every mailbox on the street and sent a copy to the county office with a polite cover letter asking for help to ensure HOA rules are fair and lawful. The reaction was immediate and messy. Neighbors called the board furious. They demanded answers at meetings. The president tried to blame outside agitators, but the paper trail pointed right at them. When the county received my letter, an inspector came by to ask questions about their patrol and their insurance. When the inspector left, he said something I didn't expect. "You did good work here." People started talking in the open now, not whispering behind curtains, but in the diner and at the grocery store. Some apologized to me quietly for not standing up sooner. Some said they had been scared of losing their place in the neighborhood if they spoke out. Fear had been the strongest tool the board had used, but once the fear cracks, People find their voice. The board grew desperate. They tried new tactics. They threatened lawsuits with big words and bigger bills. They attempted to pass a motion banning distribution of unofficial materials in the community. They sent more patrol cars that drove slow and mean past my house late at night. But with more eyes on them, they moved like animals in a net. Anxious and clumsy, one night, Tia, president called me. Her voice was sharp and small on the other end. She asked if we could meet in person to talk things out. I knew bargains when I saw them, so I went. We met in the parking lot behind the clubhouse. She wore sunglasses even though it was dusk, and she smiled like a judge who had already closed the book on a case. She offered me a solution. A quiet deal to remove the lien threat if I agreed to take down my mailbox and to sign a waiver saying I would not speak about the board in public again. It was a test, an offer wrapped in a noose. I looked at her and at the papers in her hand. I thought about my father's words about land and name. I thought about all the neighbors who had slowly begun to stand up because one man refused to bend. I told her no. I told her calmly that I would not sign away my voice for silence. She frowned and warned me about legal action again. I warned her back about the papers I had and the questions the county inspector might ask if things did not get sorted. We left that night with words and threats floating in the air like ash. I walked home under a sky I felt belonged to no one and everyone at once. My mailbox glinted in the moonlight like a small flag of the war. We fought with pens and paper. Then came the meeting that changed everything. The clubhouse was packed more than ever before. People filled seats and stood in the back. A quiet energy charged the room. The board had prepared a speech about safety and unity, but the room shifted when Mr. Carter stood up and told his story about being threatened by the same people who now led the board. Then Lisa from the diner spoke about patrol cars asking for favors. A few others stood and spoke about misapplied fines, about letters that never arrived, and about how the board had used fear to build power. When it was my turn, I stood and let the timeline I had printed speak for me. I walked the room through the pictures, the dates, the notes from the county inspector. I watched faces change from doubt to shock to quiet anger. The president's smile was gone for good too. His time. Her allies looked away like men who had been caught with their hands in a jar. In the end, the county stepped in, not because I wanted them to take power from the community, but because someone had to make sure power was used fairly. The board was forced to revise its rules and to remove the punitive fines that had no legal footing. The patrol drivers were reassigned, and the security service was told to stop harassing residents. It was not a full victory. Change in a small town happens slow, but the board lost its iron cloak of fear. And more importantly, people remembered how to speak in public again. When I walked home that night, the mailbox stood there like a small, dark promise I had kept. Neighbors waved at me now in the street, not with pity, but with something like respect. Mr. Carter patted my shoulder and said, "You did right, son." But the fight had left scars. My truck window still had a crack in it from the brick. Some neighbors still avoided me, and there were court costs I had to cover for the fight I chose. Still, I felt lighter, because I had taken their rules and their words and turned them back on the men who used them like clubs. I had learned that sometimes the best weapon is paper, and patience, and refusing to be small. They thought the worst was over, that after the county stepped in, the storm would pass. But power that is used badly does not give up easily. It claws and it waits, and it finds a new way to strike. I woke one morning to a stack of new papers on my porch. Court summons again. Only this time, it was different. They accused me of trespass on community land when I had taken photos from the sidewalk. They said I had harassed residents by handing out flyers. They claimed I had intimidated board members by standing near their cars. The list read like a bad joke, but the weight in my hands felt real enough. I called the county clerk, asked for a copy. Of every claim the HOA had filed in the last year, there were more than I expected. A long paper trail of petty suits and strange fines. It looked like the board had built a machine to grind people down and then call it governance. I went to my truck and drove to the diner. Lisa was there, pouring coffee like she always did. Face tired but steady, she slid a cup toward me and said, "They won't stop until someone makes them pay attention." She had found more than she let on before. Names and receipts and a list of patrol expenses that did not match any real bills. She told me quietly where to look next. Which files to pull at the county office. She smiled the kind of smile that told me she was in this for real now. We worked in the open more after that, not shouting from porches, but making a plan that used the law as armor and the truth as a blade. We filed countersuits where a suit was nonsense. We requested formal audits of the HOA accounts. We asked for proof of payments to the patrol company and to the president's friend who managed landscaping contracts. They rose up like a wounded animal. The president posted a long letter on the community board, blaming me for dividing the neighborhood. Her words were full of big phrases about respect and order. But the posts were thin as paper against the facts we had collected. Neighbors read the posts and then read the flyers we had dropped the week before. Things were changing, inch by inch. Then came the night I walked into my yard and found a camera staring at me. It was small, hidden on a neighbor's tree, a lens like an eye. They had started watching me like I was the one who might do something wrong again. I took a photo of the camera and the tree and sent it to the county inspector. Privacy laws are a strange thing when people use fear as permission to spy. The inspector called me the next day. He spoke with a tone that was almost tired and almost relieved. He said he had opened a larger inquiry into the HOA practices. That was the crack I had been waiting for. When sunlight goes, it hits a crack. It grows. The board pushed back hard. They called more meetings and posted more warnings. They sent letters threatening more liens and more court dates. But with every push they made, another neighbor came forward with a small story. One woman showed us a fine. She paid for a tiny gate that had been on her property for 30 years. A man brought receipts proving the patrol car had changed a report to hide the name of a driver who hit a mailbox on another street. Little things hinged the whole thing open like a rusty lock. I remember the night the president came to my fence. She stood on her porch with the glow of her porch light behind her like armor. She said, "You think you can change how things work around here?" I said, "I think I can make things follow the rules they always said mattered." She laughed softly and said, "You will lose more than a mailbox if you keep this up." Maybe she meant money. Maybe she meant friends. Maybe she meant worse. I did not flinch. Her face twitched before she left. And I saw fear there for the first time, because for a long time she had only shown strength and control. Now she showed the thinness of that control. The county finally called a hearing where neighbors could speak with a state mediator present. I planned my words like a man who knows he must be clear and calm. When I stood to speak, I said only what was true. I told the story of the smashed mailboxes, the wrecked car, the brick in my truck. I laid the photos on the table and watched faces around me change color with shock and recognition. Several neighbors asked to be heard after me. They told small stories that added up to a larger picture of fear and misuse of power. The mediator listened and then asked the board for their records. They fumbled through files and then presented pages missing dates and signatures. It was not deliberate at first glance, just sloppy, but the count does. The detective who sat in the room looked at those files like he saw blood in the water. He asked for bank records next. The discovery was not cinematic. No dramatic headline in the paper yet. Just small, steady facts that showed payments to friends and services that did not seem to exist. One payment stood out, a large deposit to a shell company that shared an address with the president's son's business. It was the sort of thing that looks small in a line on a spreadsheet, but heavy like a stone when you pick it up. They could have settled quietly. Most people in these cases do, but the president doubled down. She called a private meeting with her allies and told them to stand firm. She said the community would back her if she framed us as troublemakers. That night her son's truck sat in my driveway with a flat tire. A note under his wiper read, "We know where you sleep." It was meant to scare me back into silence. It did the opposite. I called the detective the next morning and gave him everything I had. He drove out to my ranch and looked around like a man who does not speak unless the paper and the law tell him to. He took photos of the surveillance camera, of the broken truck window, of the note. By the end of the week there were more cars from the county parked near the clubhouse than there were patrol cars from the HOA. The pressure shifted then. Not like a sudden wind that changes everything in a day, but like a slow tide that pulls the shore clear over months. Board members began missing meetings. Contracts were delayed and then audited. The patrol company sent a letter saying they no longer had a contract with the HOA because their invoices could not be justified. One morning I woke up and read a small notice taped to the clubhouse door. Due to recent events, the board has resigned until further notice. It looked like a small scrap of paper to anyone who did not know the cost behind it. I felt tired and almost empty when I read it, because victory carries a price, court costs, late nights, a truck window still cracked, and a neighbor I would never fully trust again. But the truth was free in a way money cannot buy. People started to talk openly about how the board had been using fear to shape their lives. Children played where they once moved carefully so as not to be noticed. Neighbors repaired fences and painted porches without wondering if they would be punished for the color they chose. When I walked past the clubhouse that day, I saw Mr. Carter standing by the mailbox and smiling. He waved at me like a man who had watched a storm and found a calm place afterward. I tipped my hat to him and to the others who had stepped forward slowly, and then all at once. It did not fix everything in a day. There were still bills to pay and windows to replace, and nights when I dreamt of bricks and threats. But the machine that had ground people down was gone for now. The rules returned to being rules again, not swords to be used on neighbors. And for a long while after that, people asked me why I had fought so hard. I told them simply that the land my family worked was not just dirt and fence, it was memory and name and hard work. I told them I could not let fear own those things anymore. When the board resigned, people thought the story ended there, a small scrap of paper taped to the clubhouse door. That was it. But I knew better. Power doesn't just vanish, it hides. It waits. It whispers in corners until it finds a way to crawl back. At first, the neighborhood felt free. Lawns grew a little taller without fear of fines. Kids rode bikes down the street without patrol cars following behind them. The clubhouse sat empty, a ghost of the control that used to hang over us. People smiled more, waved at each other again. It felt like something I hadn't seen here in years. Community. But peace never comes without a shadow. The old president still lived just a block away. I saw her sometimes, standing on her porch in the evenings, arms crossed, eyes following me like she was counting every step I took. She didn't have the title anymore, but her stare still felt like a warning, and some neighbors hadn't forgotten either. They didn't speak to me, didn't wave, didn't bring up the past, but their silence carried weight, like they blamed me for the fight. Even if the board had been the ones pulling the strings, one night, I sat on my porch sipping coffee as the sun dipped behind the trees. The crickets started singing. The air smelled of dust and grass. For the first time in months, I felt calm, until I heard the crunch of gravel down the road. A truck slowed near my driveway. Not a patrol car this time. It rolled past slow. Headlights dimmed, and then sped off. I stared after it, heart pounding again. Was it just a neighbor heading home late, or something else? In HOA land, you never knew anymore. The next morning I checked my mailbox. Not broken, not bent, but inside. Another note, 4 words again. We are not done. I held the paper in my hands and felt the old fire return. Was it the old board, the president, or just someone who liked the chaos too much to let it die? I couldn't tell, but I wasn't going to let shadows scare me anymore. I took the note to the county detective who had helped with the inquiry. He looked at it, shrugged, said without fingerprints or a witness there wasn't much to do. But he told me something that stuck in my head. He said, "When you take power from people who abuse it, they always try to take it back. The question is, will the rest of the community let them?" That question burned in me because I knew the fight wasn't just mine anymore. If the board came back, or if a new one rose up just like it, the people would have to choose. Would they let fear rule again, or would they finally stand tall together? Weeks passed. The grass grew wild in places. Trash cans lingered on curbs a little longer than usual. The perfect image of the neighborhood began to fade, and for some, that was freedom, but for others, it looked like failure. One evening at the diner, I overheard 2 women whispering, "This place is falling apart, without rules," one said. "Maybe we do need someone in charge again," the other replied. I realized then, the fight was far from finished, because control doesn't always wear the same face. It can come back wrapped in promises of safety and order, and people who are tired of conflict will welcome it without seeing the trap. So I started talking again, not about mailboxes this time, but about choices. I told neighbors that rules weren't the problem. It was who held them, and how they used them. Rules are like fences. They can keep you safe, Or they can box you in. Some listened, nodded, even agreed. Others rolled their eyes, tired of the subject, but at least the words were out there. The mailbox stood strong through it all. Not one dent, not one crack. It became a quiet symbol, not just of me, but of what it meant to push back and survive. Every time someone walked past it, they remembered the crash of the patrol car, the lies of the board, the night when fear lost, but the scars lingered. My truck still bore the cracked window. I still jumped when tires screeched in the distance, and sometimes at night, I dreamed of headlights flying toward me again. One night I woke sweating, shotgun across my lap. Though I hadn't meant to grab it, I sat there staring out the window until dawn, and I asked myself, had I really won? Or had I just survived one battle in a war that never ends? Because the truth about HOAs, about people with petty power, is that they don't just disappear. They wait for the moment when everyone else grows too tired to keep fighting, and maybe one day, they'll try again. Until then, my mailbox stands, cold, silent, unbroken. Now I'll leave you with this. If you were in my shoes, living in a place where freedom feels like chaos to some and order feels like prison to others, what would you choose? Would you rather live with too many rules or with none at all? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know where you stand in this fight.